Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Ivor Ichikowitz, chairman of TransAfrica Capital, to discuss next-gen African investment and the influence of the United States on the continent. It's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Good to be here, Jill.
Ivor, tell us about your insights and those you would believe to be of like-minded influencers on the continent of Africa regarding the U.S. elections. How does Africa view America today?
Well, the result of our survey is really quite fascinating because what we discovered is that young Africans, and we focused specifically on young Africans, but my focus has been on the entire African continent, and my view has always been that America seriously underestimates Africa as an ally. And Africans view America in a very positive light right now. The survey has shown that young Africans aspire to American values, aspire to things American. And I don't think that Americans and American business understands the extent to which this population of more than 1 billion people actually aspire to things American. So Africa is looking at America right now completely perplexed, because everybody considers Africa to be the continent where elections go wrong and political conflict is an absolute. And we're looking at America and we're saying, what in heaven's name is this about? You know, we're the place where you're supposed to be looking to for election chaos. So I think that a lot of Africans today are looking at America and saying, hey, these people are a bit like us. You know, this is, we really are part of the rest of the world, and America is a little bit like Africa, and Africa is a little bit like America. So in many ways, I think that the recent issues in America have brought Africa and America closer, because a lot of the issues that Africa and Africans have been experiencing for years and years and years, America is now starting to deal with. Issues of racism, issues of trying to get an understanding of what is an African, what is an American. You know, issues of identity are starting to become real issues in America, and they've always been issues in Africa. So I think that there is a kind of a sense of identification that is at a higher level than it ever has been before. And I think this creates a massive opportunity for an American engagement with Africa, for a far more comprehensive American engagement with Africa.
Tell us about the motivations for sponsoring the African Youth Survey of 2020, your foundation's plans to administer the study year on year, and your reaction to the findings as they pertain to the influence on the continent. And I would agree with you. A lot of us are asking ourselves that here in the US as well. Like, who are we?
Like, what is going on? Look, I have always been an Afro-optimist. I am a very proud African, and I'm very proud of my continent. And I love its people, and I love its energy, and I've always been positive about Africa. And as I've traveled around the world, everybody that I have met, well, many people that I have met, think I'm completely mad, because from a Western context, Africa is the dark continent. It's the continent that is beset with huge issues of corruption. It was the place that suffered from apartheid and suffered from colonialism. And what right do I have to be positive and optimistic and hopeful for the future of Africa? And I realized that the generation of 18 to 26-year-olds that is emerging right now is the first generation of Africans that have never lived under apartheid and never lived under colonialism. And I realized that this was the population that was going to take Africa into the future. And I wanted to get a sense, a scientific sampling and a sense of what was going on in these people's minds. And it was a huge risk, because either I was going to find the optimism and the positivity and the energy that I'd always seen as I travel around Africa, or I was going to find exactly the opposite. And I'm very excited to say that what the survey has uncovered is that we were always right. This is a generation of people that are positive about their future, that see themselves as part of the global economy, that see themselves identifying very strongly with the likes of the United States, and see themselves as part of the future of the world, not just as part of Africa. So my foundation is intent on establishing an annual benchmark that allows us to measure each year's survey against the results of the previous years, that is going to give this data to governments around the world so that policymakers who are responsible for making policy around Africa, that relates to Africa, have got a benchmark of what they're dealing with, what these people think, what their aspirations are, what their hopes and desires are, and what they look like as a consumer base.
Yeah, and Ivor, I would agree with you. I've covered African markets. I believe the entrepreneurial spirit on the continent is second to none. I think there's a lot of opportunity with fintech, especially on the continent, with so many people that are looking for payments and using mobile for their banking. There's just so much opportunity there, but we have to address the civil conflicts that exist, right? You have issues in Ethiopia, there's just security threats in Mozambique. Is America stepping up to the plate to support these often exportable threats to peace and stability on the continent? How do you quell foreign investment concerns in some of these markets, because as much opportunity as there, these real threats exist?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we need to be very realistic about this. Conflict on the African continent is seen by the demographic that we surveyed as one of the single biggest inhibitors to growth and development. So there's no question that this is a huge issue. But it's a bigger issue for the United States and the West, because unfortunately, a lot of the conflict in Africa is driven by fundamentalism, which is aimed at the West. The fundamentalist groups, these jihadist groups, are using Africa as a source of recruitment for activity in the West. And America is stepping up very quietly, very unassumingly. The United States is playing a very important supporting role. But in my opinion, the American government has not made their efforts public. They've not sufficiently shown the world and shown Africa the extent to which they are concerned about these security threats in Africa. And I think that under a new government, potentially under a Biden government that wants to re-engage with the world, this will change. And I do believe that there is a big opportunity for America to become a lot prouder and, well, louder and prouder about the initiatives that they're showing in Africa to deal with the security threats, or help African governments to deal with their security threats. And I accept that they are selfish, because they are mainly aimed at making sure these security threats don't spill over into the United States and elsewhere. But in the meanwhile, they are making a difference and are making a contribution to reducing the pressure of conflict on the African continent.
Let me ask you about China, because as you mentioned before, one of the historical issues with Africa is colonialism, of course. So what's at stake by ignoring Chinese inroads as it pertains to Chinese dominant hold on, example, Africa's precious metals resources? Look how much infrastructure and transportation projects that they're doing in the Eastern Horn of Africa. They really have a stronghold there. So, you know, I'm always curious to see how Africa thinks about that and the perception of colonialism, and of course, you know, how America should respond to that.
Well, let's start with Africa's perceptions of China. So first of all, Africa's perceptions of China are positive. They're not negative. But their perceptions of America are far more positive than their perceptions of China. Most Africans today aspire to be working with America far more than they aspire to be working with China. However, America has been absent. American business, American banks, American financial institutions have been completely absent. And the Chinese have stepped in and filled the gap. And you cannot blame African governments for working with the Chinese, because there was nobody else to work with. And if you look at what the Chinese have achieved in Africa, hats off to them. They have built roads, they have built water supply, they have built dams, they have built infrastructure. They've helped African governments develop the continent in the last 15 years. In a way that development has never happened, not even under colonialism. So we mustn't degrade the value of Chinese involvement in Africa. However, that doesn't mean that Africans would rather work with the Chinese and not the Americans.
So, Ivor, to wrap up here, according to your study, nearly 8 in 10 young Africans deem Wi-Fi connectivity human right. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about connectivity on the continent. What would American audiences not realize about Africa's next generation in terms of market access, of course, access the key word, and market potential?
So internet connectivity is identified as one of the biggest issues on the continent. It is considered to be a basic human right, And what Americans don't realize, and what the rest of the world doesn't realize, is Africans are perhaps some of the most connected people out there right now. So we've got a generation of young Africans that are connected to each other and connected to the rest of the world. So they are de facto today a massive market for the United States. They are a market that exists right now. They're not a potential market. They're not a market into the future. They are today's market, and they are waiting to be engaged with. They're waiting to be tapped. They're waiting to be valued. And I think that this creates a massive, massive opportunity for the United States, for the new government in America, for commerce in general. And I think that the opportunity that this creates can translate into billions of dollars of revenue for both Africa and the United States in a very short period of time.
All right, Ivor, appreciate the insight. It was great speaking with you. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.